welcome back. Today I have my top 13 Dollar Tree fall DIYs from last year to share with you all in one video today, so that way you can sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you're new here, welcome. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss out on a new video. All right, let's get started. For this first DIY, I picked up 5 of these wooden pumpkins from Dollar Tree. I specifically liked the color of these ones. They do have white and a green one and a darker orange, but I like this yellowy orange color. So I started off by removing just the bows on the top of the stems, and now I'm going to flip them over and I'm going to remove the tags because I'm going to use the backs of the pumpkins instead of the fronts because, like I said, I like the color, so I want to stick with that and not have to repaint these. So it took a little bit to remove the tags, but adding a little bit of heat made it kind of easy, so that's what I did. Then to get the sticky residue off, I just used a little bit of Goo Gone and then made sure I wiped it really clean after that. Now I'm going to just use some stencils that I got off of Amazon a long time ago, and I'm going to spell out the word fall onto this pumpkin. So each pumpkin is going to have a letter in fall. I started out using white paint to stencil my letters. It was like a white creamy paint, and I thought that's the look I was going for, but in the end you'll see that I changed that later on. But you know, that's what DIY is all about, is just kind of going with the flow, and if you don't like something in the beginning, you hopefully can go back and change it, which I could with these stencils. So I went ahead, before I changed the letters, I went ahead and decided to paint little pumpkins on each one of these pumpkins. So I just used some of that white paint in a small paintbrush, and I basically just painted little ovals or circles around, and I wasn't worried if they were perfect because I wanted them to kind of look more rustic and painted on. And then I took a little bit of brown paint and I just made little stems on each one. The white paint I was using was the white acrylic paint from Dollar Tree, and it seems to not cover that well. So I did, after the pumpkins were dry, I went over them again with a second coat of paint just to make sure they were a little bit darker and you could see them just a little bit better. Okay, now after I got the pumpkins all painted, I'm going to work on the letters. They just didn't stand out enough for me, so at first I decided I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm just going to go ahead and trace around all of the letters, and that'll help make it stand out. But I didn't like that either, so I ended up going back with a thicker Sharpie marker, and I just used that to color in the letters, and I think it looks a lot better like that. Now that everything is dry, I'm going to go ahead and attach my pumpkins together. I'm just using some hot glue to do this, but I only use hot glue for video purposes, just so that way it makes everything dry a little bit quicker for me. So I would definitely recommend using E6000 or wood glue to give this a stronger hold, because if it falls, it will break with just being held together with hot glue. Next thing I did was I used some of this lace ribbon to make 4 little bows for the tops of my pumpkins. I just attached those with some hot glue to the stems, and that was perfectly fine. And I love how this turned out. So this next DIY is a take on my Halloween wreath. If you didn't see that, check out the video. It's linked down below in the description box. But I just took some of this yellowy orange ribbon from Dollar Tree and one of these foam wreath forms from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to go ahead and wrap the whole thing with this yarn. I just started at one end, hot glued that end down, and then just kept wrapping it, and I kept it tight as I went it around. And this is a little time consuming. It takes about a half an hour to wrap the whole wreath. But if you put on a TV show and relax, it's something, you know, that you can do pretty easily. And then I used a bunch of these dahlias to kind of give it a little bit of contrast and put some flowers on this wreath. So I used 6 dahlias and I just took them off the stems. There is a little part that sticks out at the bottom of the dahlia that makes it not sit flush, and also on the leaf. So I just cut that flush off of the leaf and the flower, and then I hot glued the leaves to the bottom of the flower and then hot glued the whole thing around the wreath. And I did it on just one side of the wreath form. And then I decided to use some of these small little pumpkins that comes from one of these leaf bunches from Dollar Tree. I had 4 of them left, so I just took them off and hot glued them in between the flowers and around the wreath the way I liked it. And it's such a simple, pretty wreath, but it definitely packs a punch with that yellow color, and it matches the pumpkins from the first DIY. So I love how that worked out. And now I have a cute wreath for fall and then also one for Halloween. I love how it turned out. So for this DIY, I'm going to be making some yarn pumpkins for a yarn pumpkin garland. So I'm using that same gold orange yarn that I used in the last DIY, and then also some cream colored yarn. I'm going to start off by just wrapping the gold yarn around my hand about 35 to 40 times, the same way you would do for a tassel or a pom-pom. Then I'm going to carefully take off the yarn so that way it keeps its shape, and I'm going to use some twine to tie off my pumpkin. So I just cut a very long piece of twine because I wasn't sure how long my garland was going to be, but I cut that off, and then I started at one end and I just tied the twine around the middle of my yarn. And then I'm going to make a little stem with the twine just by kind of looping the extra twine on the one side and using a little bit of hot glue to secure that down. So I have like a little loop at the top, and then I'm just going to fluff my pumpkin out, and then I'm going to alternate colors. So I'm going to do the same thing with the cream colored yarn to make a cream colored pumpkin. And if you don't want to use your hand to make your pumpkins, to wrap your pumpkins, you could use a piece of cardboard or a piece of wood, whatever you have to do that, because I know it does kind of get a little bit tight when you're wrapping it around your hand. But yeah, then you just, for the second one, you just use that extra twine and you just tie a knot, and then you feed that extra twine through. So that way your garland is continuous and it keeps going. And then you do the same thing with the extra twine and make a little stem by looping it and using a little bit of hot glue. So I just kept doing this all the way down my twine, alternating the colors, and I ended up doing 6 of the cream colored pumpkins and actually 7 of the gold yellowy orange pumpkins, so that way I would start with the one color and end with the same color on my garland. So it's up to you. You can make it however long or however short you would like to. And then once you're done, you just cut the excess twine off. Now that I had all my pumpkins done, I am going to go ahead and take some of that lace ribbon again, and I'm going to tie it in between my pumpkins, and I'm just cutting small little pieces just to give it something a little bit extra. So this is totally optional. You don't have to do this, or you could use different ribbon. It's up to you, but I kind of liked how it looked, and it kind of tied the other DIYs in to this one, so everything kind of matches. And that was it for this. I think it turned out really pretty for fall. For this DIY, I picked up 4 of these neutral colored dried flower arrangements from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use a paper towel cardboard piece, but I actually ended up cutting that a little bit over more than half off, so you could use a toilet paper roll holder if you wanted to. And then I'm gonna make a dried floral arrangement that stands up on its own. I've seen these around, like the dried wheat arrangements and things like that, and they're like $40 or something like that. So I wanted to make one that was definitely a lot less. So basically what I did was I just went around the paper towel roll thing, and I just hot glued in strips the big pieces of floral that were in each bunch, and I saved the smaller pieces, and I'm going to add those later. So I didn't have enough. I probably should have had 5 packs of these dried flowers, but that's okay. I ended up cutting just one side of the cardboard, and I'm gonna use a little bit of hot glue to tuck that underneath there, so that way it matches up and it looks like it's complete. After all of the long pieces were on, I went ahead and took these shorter pieces that were a different style of dried flowers, and I hot glued those around the bottom. And when you're hot gluing these around, you want to make sure that you're keeping the bottom of the stems even with the bottom of the cardboard, so that way everything stands up straight. I did end up cutting just a little bit off the bottom there just to make sure that it was even. And then once everything was done, I just took some more of that lace ribbon. I really love this lace ribbon, and I'm just going to use it to tie a little bow around the arrangement, which I think just finishes it off nicely and makes it just look like a bunch of dried floral, and it's perfect for fall or all year long. For the last DIY, I'm using one of the 8x10 canvases from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to simply use an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to go around the edges of the back with it to take off that canvas. This is the easiest way to remove the canvas. Once that's removed, I went ahead and used some acrylic paint mixed with water to stain the wood frame, and I let that dry. Then I'm going to go ahead and take some of these little wooden stickers that come from Dollar Tree. They come in a pack with the leaves and the pumpkins together. There's 8 pumpkins and 8 leaves. So I decided to paint the leaves with that yellowy gold color, which they actually sell the acrylic paint for at Dollar Tree. And then I took some more of that acrylic paint mixed with water and stained the pumpkins to match the frame. Let everything dry, and then I'm just going to take my wooden frame, and I'm going to hot glue my canvas onto my wooden frame, and then I just cut the excess canvas around the edges to make sure that it was even and it looked nice. And then with the pumpkins and the leaves, I'm going to place them on my canvas. I'm just alternating from pumpkins to leaves, and I'm going to use a little bit of hot glue to secure them down. And that was really it for this DIY. Super simple, but really pretty. First DIY, I'm going to be using this nautical cotton rope. I started off with one package of it, and I just took this small little picture frame from Dollar Tree to use that to wrap my nautical rope around, so that way I would try to have the same size loops. So I wrapped it all the way around to the end, and then I just slid it off of the picture frames. Now I'm going to take some of this cotton twine that I had, and I'm going to tie it around through the inside of the loops of the nautical rope. And then I just double knotted it, and I cut off the excess nautical rope, and I cut off the excess twine. Now I'm going to take a few of the pieces, and where I tied the rope at, just move up just a little bit, and I'm going to hot glue them down just a little bit together, so that way my nautical rope sections stand up a little bit firmer. And then I'm going to do this for three more sections. So I'm going to have four sections of this nautical rope. So I used 4 packages of the nautical rope for this pumpkin. Now that I have my 4 sections, I'm going to turn those 4 sections together where the nautical rope is tied and the loops are facing outward, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to use another piece of twine, and I'm going to feed that through all of the sections of all of the loops, and then I'm going to tie it really tight and double knot it. The tighter you tie it, the more it will take a pumpkin shape, if that makes sense. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play around with it and kind of fluff it up where it needs to be fluffed up at. And then I just took some hot glue and glued some of the pieces together just around the top and also on the bottom side of the pumpkin, so that way it stood up a little bit better. And then I would also suggest, to keep the pumpkin's shape, to use some fabric starch and to just spray it with that and let it sit, so that way it hardens a little bit and the pumpkin keeps its shape a little bit better. Then I took an extra piece, a small extra piece of the nautical rope, and I folded it over and hot glued it together, and then I used that as my stem, so I just hot glued it in the middle there. And then I wanted some contrast, so I went ahead and took some brown acrylic paint and painted the stem just brown, so like I said, it would have a little bit of contrast and stand out from the actual pumpkin itself. To finish off the pumpkin, I just used some of this striped Farmhouse ribbon I found at Dollar Tree, and I tied it around the stem and made a bow, and that was it. I think this pumpkin turned out so perfect for some fall decor and something a little bit different than the fabric pumpkins I've seen everywhere else, and I think it's super cute. Now back to the DIYs. For this next one, I'm going to use 2 of these round little boxes with lids that come from Dollar Tree and some of the round styrofoam pieces that come from Dollar Tree. 2 of them come in a pack. I'm just going to remove the lids and set them off to the side for now, and I'm going to use the boxes to trace out on top of the pieces of styrofoam 2 smaller circles that will easily fit inside my round circle boxes. So you can see here I had to cut a few times, and the circles were not perfect, but they did just fit kind of snugly at the top inside of each box, and I filled in just a little bit with some of the extra styrofoam so that way the styrofoam wouldn't sit on the bottom of the boxes. And then I used a little hot glue to secure them, making sure that styrofoam wouldn't be pushed down inside. Now I'm going to use some of this moss green spray paint, and I'm going to spray paint each box. Then I just set the boxes inside the lids. So the lids were on the bottom of the boxes now. And now I'm going to take some of these pumpkins with the leaves on the stems from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to remove the pumpkins actually and the berries off of them to use for this project. I ended up only using 5 of the small pumpkins for this project because the other box, the other green box that's over there, I am actually going to do something different with, and you'll see that in a minute in the video. And the rest of the pumpkins from the stems that I had, I used later on in the video. I had 5 bunches of those leaves and pumpkin stems all together, just so you know, but I spread them out between 2 different projects. So what I'm going to do with these 5 pumpkins is I'm just hot gluing them around in a circle around the box and hot gluing them to the styrofoam, and I put them on their side and kind of tilted them up a little bit when I was hot gluing them, and then I hot glued the pumpkins together. And then there is a pumpkin on the top in the middle that I just hot glued to the rest of the pumpkins. And then there are some gaps, obviously, so that's where the berries come into play. I'm just going to take those berries and I'm just using scissors and I'm cutting them into smaller pieces that I see that I need them to fit at, and then I'm just fitting them on and hot gluing them to fill in all of those gaps around the piece. So these pumpkins do not have stems on them, and they kind of looked a little funny without stems, so you could improvise and use whatever you'd like for little stems for these, but I just decided to cut up some of the little stems that came from the bunches that I had, those little brown pieces, and then I just hot glued them inside the tops of the pumpkins. And then lastly for this, I used some of this lace ribbon from Dollar Tree and I just wrapped it around the top, and then I took another piece and tied a bow with it and I hot glued that bow down. So I think this one turned out super cute, but like I said, I decided to do something different with the other one because I just wanted something different. So instead of having it green, I decided to paint it with this chiffon cream chalk paint I had. So I went outside and I painted the box with that. And then I had these little orange flowers from Dollar Tree and I plucked them off of the stems. I believe I had 2 bunches of these to cover this all up. And so I just decided to hot glue those around the edge of the box there to make a circle. And then for the second layer, I hot glued them to the flowers that were already hot glued down to the styrofoam. So after the first layer, the flowers are all glued to themselves. They're not glued to the styrofoam because I wanted that gradual cone shape as the flowers came up to kind of make like a cupcake shape, if that makes sense. So the flowers are all glued to themselves upwards. I hope that makes sense, but that way they are not glued down to the styrofoam and it just gives it a better shape, I think. And then I did the same thing with some different ribbon. I found this pumpkin burlap ribbon at Dollar Tree that was super cute and I tied a little bow and hot glued that down. And I think both of these projects turned out adorable. I like them both together. I like them both separately. Let me know down in the comments which one you liked more if you like them both. For the last DIY, I am going to make a base out of 4 of these wooden squares that I had left over from Dollar Tree. They came in a pack of 6, but I had 4 of them left. So you can make a base out of a plate, a tray, whatever you would like, but I just wanted to use these up, and I just hot glued the edges together to make a bigger square. Then I'm going to take one of these buckets with the rope around the top of them, and I'm going to hot glue it down to my base there. It works just fine hot gluing that twine to the wood. Then I had some raffia from Dollar Tree as well, and I cut it up into smaller pieces to make it look like hay, and I'm just hot gluing it down to that wooden base and then also inside that bucket, so like it's coming out of the bucket. I think maybe if you would use spray glue, that would help to glue everything down a little bit better, because hot glue was a little bit harder to work with all these little pieces and everything, but it still worked out. I just filled it all up and then I trimmed around the edges, and I didn't make it perfect because it just wanted it to look like hay was spilling out of it. And then I took some of these green and white pumpkins that I got from Dollar Tree, and I am just hot gluing them down to the inside of the bucket and then also the base, so that way it looks like the bucket is spilling out the pumpkins. And this just makes this, like, I've seen this display before, but this just kind of makes it like an all-in-one display, so you can kind of just pick it up and put it away at the end of the year instead of having everything scattered all over the place. And then here's those little tiny pumpkins that were left over from the other project. I just used those to fill in some gaps, and I added some extra hay, and that was it. A quick, easy, cute fall display. This first DIY, I have 6 of these wooden pumpkins with the letters already on them. I found all of the letters to spell out the word gather, but if you can find welcome or hello fall or just fall or pumpkin, you could spell out pretty much anything with these. And then I took 9 wooden dowels, which these are the ones from Dollar Tree, and I'm gluing them in sets of 3 side by side, so that way I just make a thicker wooden dowel. Now I'm going to make a sign out of these wooden pumpkins. So I'm just going to lay my pumpkins face down, and I'm going to stack them on top of each other, spelling out the word gather vertically. And I'm going to hot glue the stems of the pumpkins to the bottoms of the other pumpkins. And then for some extra support, I'm using those sets of 3 wooden dowels on the backs of the pumpkins and hot gluing them down them, so that way everything is extra stable. The last set of wooden dowels I did have to cut in half, but I just cut them in half so that way it was even with the bottom of the bottom pumpkin. And that was it for this cute little standing fall sign. This next DIY, I'm using one of the 8x10 canvases from Dollar Tree. I love using these canvases for all sorts of DIYs. And to take the canvas off of the wood frame, I just use an X-Acto knife and I just cut the back off that you see here, and then I just pull it apart from the staples, and I just leave the staples in because you're not going to see that side anyways. Now what I want to do is where it's creased at from where it was folded over the frame, I'm going to go ahead and cut down those creases because I want this to be flat and nice and even. Next, I'm going to go ahead and take that frame and I'm going to use some watered down brown paint to just stain it. I just put a coat on there and I wiped the excess off, and then I just let that dry. Now for the canvas, I am going to use my printer to print on my canvas. So I went ahead and made this free printable on canva.com. This is not sponsored, but it's super easy to use and everything is free here. You can size it to whatever size you'd like. You can pick different fonts and lots of them are free. There is a version that's not free, but this whole printable I used with everything that was free on Canva. I just downloaded it and then now I can print it off my computer. The link is down below for the free printable. Now the printer that I'm using is this HP 4500, which I've had for 10 years and it works perfect to print on canvas. So here's the canvas. One side is the canvas material, which is a cream color. The other side is more white. I'm gonna print on the actual canvas colored material. So I'm gonna put it upside down, load it in my printer, press print, and it comes out just like that. My words and my picture and everything, and it looks great. Now I just need to attach my frame to my canvas. So I'm just gonna line it up and then I just flipped it over and added some hot glue to the back side and placed it on top of my canvas. There was some extra canvas around the frame that I just trimmed off with my scissors, and that was it for this simple picture. For this DIY, I'm going to use 3 of these white and orange buffalo checked pumpkins from Dollar Tree. They're super cute the way they are, but I just wanted to give them something a little bit extra and do something a little bit different. So I took the stems out of the pumpkins. I did save the stems for future DIYs. I'm actually going to use one of the stems later on in this video, but I'm going to take some of these white roses, which I got from Dollar Tree a long time ago. To be honest, I believe they were from a Valentine's Day video that I did a while back, so I'm repurposing them for this project today. But I'm going to just take some hot glue and put them on the backs of the roses and hot glue them on the top side around the pumpkins. I used about 5 or 6 to go around, and then it's kind of bare in the middle, so I used another one for the center and just hot glued it down in the center. And that was really it for these pumpkins. They turned out super cute and it was just a different take, and it only took a few minutes to glue these roses on. For this DIY, I am going to make a leaf wreath. Try to say that 5 times fast. Definitely can't. I'm gonna take one of the willow wreaths, and then I have 6 bunches of these white and pastel leaves from Dollar Tree they have this year. I actually used the pumpkins for a different DIY, so I'm going to use the leaves for this wreath today. I just pulled the leaves from the stems and then I cut the leaves separately so that way they were easier to work with. And then I hot glued the leaves down onto the wreath. I alternated the colors and I just layered the leaves on top of each other as I went around. So I actually only ended up using 3 bunches of these leaves for this wreath. It actually didn't take as many as I thought it would to fill this wreath up. So I just laid the leaves on the top around the wreath. I did not lay the leaves on the inside or the outer side of the wreath because the leaves were full and they took up so much space you couldn't see the inner or outer side when the wreath was hanging up, if that makes sense. And if there was any extra leaves left over, I just used them to fill in any gaps and make the wreath look fuller. For a super simple wreath, it turned out so beautiful for fall. For the final DIY, I'm going to use one of these carvable pumpkins from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use some of this Farmhouse ticking stripe ribbon from Dollar Tree as well. I had 2.5 packs of ribbon, but you definitely need a full 3 packs to cover this pumpkin. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the ribbon and cut it into strips, and then I'm going to hot glue the ribbon to the bottom and the top side of the pumpkin. Then with my next strip, I'm just going to overlap that first strip just a little bit and kind of angle it at the top there, so that way you don't see any of the orange on the pumpkin. And then I'm going to keep going around the pumpkin, just cutting strips of ribbon and hot gluing it as I go around the pumpkin and trying not to have the orange show through. Like I said, you definitely need a full 3 packs of this ribbon. And another thing I would do is I would also paint the pumpkin white or cream colored beforehand. That way you make sure if any of the pumpkin does show through, it is white. You can see here as I'm going around the pumpkin with the ribbon that there are some gaps in between each of the ribbon. So what I did was I took my hot glue gun and I just used the tip of my hot glue gun and poked it through the gaps that the ribbon was making, and just kind of pulled that ribbon so that it would not show the orange through anymore. But like I said, if you had 3 packs of this, it would work out perfectly and you wouldn't have to worry about that too much. And also if you painted the pumpkin as well. But I did get it to work, and I just continued to glue the strips of ribbon all the way around the pumpkin. And you can see better here where I'm hot gluing those gaps together so that way you don't see the orange. Now I'm going to take that stem that came from the orange and white buffalo checked pumpkins, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut the stick that sticks inside the pumpkin off. And I'm just going to hot glue the stem down to the pumpkin. And I'm using some berries that came from the leaves from the last DIY and hot glue those down, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed these Dollar Tree fall DIYs. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.